Today I'm going to be talking about disappointing books. Now to be clear, that is not books I hated, although if I were to do a video on that topic, I'm sure you guys could think of a few of the books that I would be mentioning. So instead, this is going to be books that I had tremendous high hopes for, but they let me down in some way. I always find it interesting to hear why people react negatively to certain books, especially ones that I liked. So I would love for this to be a discussion for you to comment down below about books that you're really looking forward to but then went ahead and disappointed you. I know some people just hate doing any kind of negative review, but I find them just as interesting to watch and do as positive. And again, to be clear, some of these books I really enjoyed. I'm not saying that the writing was bad, I'm just saying that I personally was disappointed. So number one was very hyped here on BookTube, and that was We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. Now, there were some things I loved about this book. I thought the writing was really beautiful in some places. I thought it was great. This was a young adult psychological thriller. You really don't see a lot of that, but that was really where the good stopped for me. This was marketed as a very unique story, just a very unique book overall, and that's how a lot of people were talking about it. But for me, if you have read or seen any psychological thriller books or movies, you're gonna see what's coming in this book from a mile away. And normally, it's not a spoiler to say that there is a twist. I mean, this is a psychological thriller, there's going to be a twist. But the twist that occurs, you see so often, and it just made the whole book incredibly unimaginative for me, because there isn't a lot going on besides this twist that I just kept thinking that was it. I think this would be a good introduction to psychological thrillers, because again, I don't think the writing is bad. I just think the book is centered around and has a trope that is so incredibly common that it was just really personally frustrating for me. Now, this next one is probably my favorite out of the bunch that we're talking about, and I would actually recommend this to other people, and that is Night Film by Marisha Pessl. Now, talking about what I disliked about this book, I'm not going to say any spoilers, but it's very difficult to talk about what I disliked without saying any spoilers. So I won't say anything that's going to give anything away. I will just say that there was a certain chunk of this book that I was very disappointed by, and if you've read the book, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. This aspect is really divisive, and I know some people thought it was fitting. Other people like me thought that it really took away from the rest of the book, but there was a lot about this book that I enjoyed, and again, I will continue to check out things by Marisha Pessl. And I guess my critique of this book is that so much of this book was so imaginative and unique, and then this thing happens and I just thought. But again, I gave this book I think 4 out of 5 stars, and I would like to discuss this aspect with people, but just make sure you put in giant font spoilers in the comment section, because I'm sure you guys who've read it know what I'm talking about, and I would like to discuss it with other people. Next, and this is a very popular, it still is a very popular series on BookTube, and out of everything I'm mentioning, this is definitely what I was most disappointed by, and if I'm being really blunt and honest, I can't even think of a single person in my life who would recommend this book to. And that is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Now, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I don't tend to keep up with new releases or anything like that, but this was one of those few books where I was watching the book trailer before it came out. I was so incredibly excited. On the surface, and including the book trailer, the images inside it, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, it seemed like it would be right up my alley. But I have to say, for me personally, the photos were the only good thing about this book. But part of me wishes those wonderful photos had been just given to a different author so that that author could come up with a different story. My biggest critique of this book is what the children in the book were like. So I'm going to compare them to something else, and some people might find this as a spoiler, but I won't get more in depth than that. So if you haven't read the series, you might want to skip until this image goes away, but it's not really a spoiler. But this book was marketed as a horror novel, had these intensely creepy, very strange, unique images, and then what I got was Little X-Men. Now, obviously you guys know I love horror, but by no means do I expect every book I read to be terrifying and horrifying, not whatsoever, but that's what this was marketed as. So for me, this is a combination of mismarketing, and then I also thought the writing wasn't very good. So let me know if the series gets any better, but overall, this was definitely, I'd say, the book I was most disappointed by ever out of anything that I've read. Next is Animal Farm by George Orwell. But I will say up front, my critique of this book is not actually anything that occurs in it or the writing. I think in a lot of ways it's a perfect book. This was only disappointing for me in that it made me realize something about myself. So I realized reading this that I do not work well with books that are very heavy satires. So again, this is the only book on the list where I think the issue is possibly with me and not the book it all, but as I was reading it, I was never immersed in it because I just kept thinking, okay, this animal represents this person in history, this event represents this event in history, and because of that I was never immersed in the book, and because I was never immersed in the book, it didn't really affect me or impact me in any kind of way. I think I still need to check out 1984, somehow I still haven't, and I definitely think I'm going to enjoy that a lot more because again, I didn't dislike the writing, it just I realized it was a style of book that personally didn't work well for me. And finally is Asylum by Patrick McGrath. Now this is another one I was incredibly hyped for. This takes place in the 1950s, I think it was. A woman is married to a psychiatrist and they're living sort of on the grounds where this insane asylum is located. One of the patients there is fixing their greenhouse, I think it was, and a romance starts to develop and everything like that. I thought the plot sounded a little Lifetime movie-ish, but I thought I could get into it. I thought it would be a fun kind of book candy kind of read, but then it turned out to be incredibly boring, at least for me. I know I'm blanking on her name, but I'll link her channel down below, but she absolutely loved this book and I will link her review of it down below. Just goes to show these are just opinions, they're not right or wrong, but the POV of this book is not from the woman, it's not from the patient, it's not from another patient, it's from another psychologist at the facility. So I was never immersed in the book. I thought just having the point of view be from this other psychologist there made the book so boring for me because his perspective and his take on everything was just so incredibly dull. I thought it would have been really cool if it was the patient who she falls for, if it had been from his point of view, or even just hers, which would have been, I guess, the most normal route to go about, but it ends up being from this dull psychologist who doesn't have any interesting inferences, at least from my point of view, about what was going on. So there you have it, guys. Those were my disappointing books. Again, I want this to be a discussion. This isn't just a video for me to get mad, because again, I did like a lot of these books, but I like hearing why people react somewhat negatively in some instances to books that I like. So I would definitely like to hear from you guys for books that you were disappointed by or didn't like. Don't worry if it was one that I recommended to you, I won't be offended. But I hope you guys liked this video and I'll see you soon.